Mercedes team principal Toto Wolff and Red Bull team principal Christian Horner expressed their criticism towards the FIA, Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile, following the Austrian Grand Prix. The primary talking point that fueled their discontent was the application of track limit penalties, particularly one that affected Esteban Ocon. Despite Ocon initially finishing in the points, he was later penalized with a 30-second penalty for not adhering to Article 33.3 of the Sporting Code. The peculiar aspect was that the penalty was imposed 5 hours after the race had concluded. Astonishingly, this delay in penalty enforcement occurred as a result of a successful protest lodged by Aston Martin. The circumstances surrounding the incident led to questioning the decision-making process of the FIA and raised concerns about their consistency and efficiency in applying penalties. Formula One team principals Toto Wolff and Christian Horner were among those expressing strong disapproval of the FIA's decision to introduce what they deemed as excessive and arbitrary penalties during the Austrian Grand Prix. However, they were not the only voices raised in protest against the governing body's controversial track limit rules. The dissatisfaction expressed by Toto Wolff and Christian Horner regarding the FIA's actions was echoed by numerous other figures within the Formula One community. The source of contention was Article 33.3 of the Sporting Code, which dictates that all F1 cars must keep within the white lines of the track with all 4 wheels. While failure to do so during a fast lap leads to lap time deletions, the penalties for doing so during the race were perceived as increasingly arbitrary. Drivers were allowed 2 warnings before receiving a strike, and after 3 strikes, a black and white flag was waved, indicating that no further track limit breaches would be tolerated, without a subsequent 5-second penalty. However, the implementation of these penalties sparked widespread confusion and frustration, prompting critics to question the consistency and effectiveness of the FIA's decision-making process. The Austrian Grand Prix witnessed a significant challenge as drivers consistently exceeded the track limits, creating a logistical nightmare for race stewards who were faced with reviewing over 1,200 violations of Article 33.3. The sheer volume of breaches meant that many penalties went unnoticed or unreviewed due to the stewards' inability to keep up with the overwhelming task at hand. However, Aston Martin's protest against this situation proved successful, leading to the subsequent review and imposition of an additional 12 penalties on various drivers. Among the affected drivers, Esteban Ocon faced the harshest consequences, incurring a 30-second penalty. This sequence of events highlighted the glaring inconsistency of the FIA's handling of track limit enforcement, despite the undeniable need for drivers to adhere to the established rules and regulations of Formula One. In the wake of the Austrian Grand Prix's track limit penalties, 7-time world champion Lewis Hamilton has voiced his concerns and called for immediate changes to the circuit. Hamilton found himself at the center of the controversy as he became the first driver penalized for failing to keep his W14 within the white lines. Although Hamilton was given a warning by his racing engineer, he struggled to maintain control of the car due to its challenging nature. Hamilton expressed his frustrations, highlighting the need for alterations to the track's layout. He explained how significant adjustments were made to the front wing setup to address the car's rear end instability and enable a long-run strategy. However, the changes resulted in an overly compromised setup, forcing Hamilton to almost reach full lock around the last 2 corners. The challenging conditions left him struggling for control, particularly at turn 10. Lewis Hamilton's call for track modifications in response to track limit penalties at the Austrian Grand Prix resonated with several other drivers, including Sergio Perez, Max Verstappen, Guan Yu Zhou, and Charles Leclerc. While these drivers managed to avoid breaching track limits, it raises questions about the root cause of the issue. Is it a genuine problem, exacerbated by the weight of the cars, particularly under the newest regulations, or are these claims merely excuses? The weight of the car is undoubtedly a factor that can impact a driver's performance. The challenging nature of the Red Bull ring, combined with the demands of the current regulations, has presented drivers with significant difficulties in keeping their cars within the designated white lines. However, it remains a subject of debate whether these challenges. Acknowledging the difficulties faced by drivers in navigating the 800-kilogram machines through high-speed corners, it becomes evident that the 1,200 breaches of track limits observed during the Austrian Grand Prix are not solely indicative of the drivers' abilities. Toto Wolff and Christian Horner, team principals of Mercedes and Red Bull respectively, share this sentiment. Wolff even took the initiative to propose a solution for the perceived challenges posed by the track. Wolff emphasized the complex situation that all stakeholders find themselves in, with regulations, the racetrack, and the FIA's enforcement efforts. He highlighted the extensive use of cameras and sensors to ensure fairness and consistency. In the pursuit of a fair assessment, Mercedes conducted their own analysis of onboard footage to ensure parity among teams. While the track limit penalties during the Austrian Grand Prix did not greatly concern Mercedes, it was the timing of the penalties imposed after the race that stirred frustration within the F1 community. The decision to issue penalties 5 hours after the race had concluded was widely regarded as obnoxious and sparked accusations that Aston Martin had become the FIA's favoured team. Critics and fans alike questioned whether Aston Martin's protest against the track limit penalties was driven by their disappointing performance in Austria, thus casting doubt on the legitimacy of their claims. Nevertheless, the penalties resulting from the protest impacted the final race standings. Both Fernando Alonso and Lance Stroll were able to gain an additional position and collect extra points in their battle against Mercedes. Ultimately, Lewis Hamilton bore the brunt of the penalties, accumulating a total of 15 seconds of penalty time by the end of the Austrian GP. The unusual timing and implications of the penalties ignited debates regarding fairness and the FIA's treatment of different teams. Upon reviewing the onboard footage of the penalties handed out during the Austrian Grand Prix, one might find it difficult to suppress laughter. The sheer magnitude of the penalties, particularly the 30-second penalty imposed, which accounts for nearly half the length of the Red Bull ring, raises legitimate questions about the threshold for such severe penalties. Considering that the fastest lap recorded at the Red Bull ring was just a few seconds over 1 minute, the extent of the penalties becomes even more puzzling. It leads to speculation about the nature and severity of the rule violations required to warrant such significant time penalties. The disparity between the perceived severity of the breaches and the resulting penalties fuels the curiosity and criticism surrounding the consistency and proportionality of the penalties imposed. The need for a clearer understanding of the standards and criteria for penalty assessment arises, ensuring a fair and transparent approach to enforcing track limit regulations. A significant point of contention revolves around whether drivers genuinely gained a lap time advantage by exceeding track limits during the Austrian Grand Prix. It is undeniable that drivers were pushing their cars to the absolute limit, considering the potential gains to be made in certain corners. Sacrificing a bit of entrance speed in turns 9 and 10 could lead to consequences, as it often resulted in the driver behind closing the gap more rapidly than usual. The drivers who received the black and white flag signaling their repeated track limit violations often found themselves overtaken by competitors from behind. With no more chances to risk going off track at turns 9 and 10, it would result in a 5-second penalty. They were forced to adhere strictly to the designated limits. This limitation impacted their ability to maintain a competitive advantage and allowed those behind them to capitalize on their penalty-free runs. Christian Horner, expressing dissatisfaction with the current state of his team's home race, raises concerns about the challenges posed by the weight of the 2023 cars. This prompts the question, what measures can the FIA take to address these issues? Horner shared his thoughts on the matter, emphasizing the need for action. In discussing the track limit issues, Horner highlights the negative impressions it creates, suggesting that the prevalence of drivers exceeding limits makes the sport appear amateurish. To mitigate these challenges, he proposes a potential solution for the future. Horner suggests a review of the track's design, advocating for adjustments that could involve adding gravel on the other side of the curb. Such modifications would serve to redefine and enforce track boundaries more effectively. The increasing influence of F1 fans, particularly through platforms like Drive to Survive, has brought new enthusiasm to the sport. However, this popularity has unintentionally shifted the FIA's focus towards appeal rather than pure competitiveness. Toto Wolff and Christian Horner's concerns about track limit penalties in Austria suggest the need for change. The FIA is likely to address these issues, striking a balance between fan engagement and fair racing. Adjustments to track design, such as modifying curbs or implementing additional deterrents, may be necessary. The goal is to enhance Formula One's popularity while maintaining competitive integrity, ensuring drivers can showcase their skills without incurring significant penalties.